Welcome to the Smiling at the Future podcast. My name is Christi Rose, and this is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, relationships, and singleness from the God-fearing men and women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Hi, ladies. This is a special day because I get to introduce you all to my one and only sister, Michelle Wendler. The topic of change is relatable to singles, wives, and moms because we all experience life changes. And Michelle has had to navigate those waters more than most, being a wife and mom in a third world country as a missionary. But I'll let her share more of her story with you all and what she's learned along the way. So here is my conversation with Michelle. Michelle, you are one of the two women who have influenced my life the most for good because you are my one and only sister. And even though we have a 9.5-year age gap, we've always had a strong bond because we were surrounded by 5 brothers. So we had to stick together to keep the femininity strong in our family. But it's funny because I'm 6 inches taller than you. And so we've always jokingly said that I am your little big sister. And I think to this day, people still think I'm older than you, which I know you probably like better more than I do. Because of our...
It's not true. Not true.
Yeah. But you are a special woman in my life. And I know our age gap felt bigger when I was 10 and you were 20. But now just being in this, both adults now, that gap has closed somewhat. But I still consider you just someone I look up to and a mentor. And for the listeners, if you have a little sister, invest in them because that will be a dear friendship someday. And Michelle would always invite me to join her in her life, and I would go with her everywhere. She would take me shopping, to her Bible studies. She just didn't ever make me feel like a burden just always included me in her life ever since I was young. And so many fun memories, and many of Michelle's friends have become my friends. But I'm excited to finally have you on the podcast and find a topic that just you have a lot of experience in and wisdom with. But before we jump into talking about how to navigate change, would you share more about yourself beyond just being my sister?
Yes, Christy, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's a huge joy to be here. And I first want to say that I'm actually a huge fan of your podcast. I listen to every episode, and I've actually been following your career since you were 6 years old, recording Stories with Christy on cassette tapes. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Now, whatever happened to those?
Yeah. I think I tossed those. It was too much blackmail.
Too bad. But I first want to say to your listeners that Christy is the real deal. She has been such an inspiration in my life and encouragement to me. She invests in my kids and in my life, and consistently calls and finds creative ways to connect to my 2 children. And when we are stateside, she will come after long days of work and play with them and bring meals and just go out of her way to stay connected. And so I want to just say my gratitude, Christy, to you for doing that. I am just so thankful for you. And I was smiling to myself as I was thinking of coming on this podcast because, like you said, there is a big age gap, and rewind 25 years, and I was the older sister, and you were the younger sister, and you went through a shy period where we would have conversations, but it was mostly me drawing you out. And now I'm on your podcast, and I was actually nervous to come on your podcast and talk with my famous sister. And also I'm so honored to be here, Christy. And a little bit about myself. So I am married to Carlin Wendler, and we are serving in Burundi, where that's in East Central Africa. My husband is an ER doctor, and he is working here to train African doctors. He's also working in a rural hospital and we have 2 children. Gabrielle is 6 and Isaiah just turned 5. And I am recording from rural Africa, so you might hear the musicians at the local church singing and children running past and chickens outside. Who knows what's gonna be in the background, but that's our setting here. But thankfully, it's a sunny day, not pouring rain, because if it was, you wouldn't be able to hear anything.
Well, you guys have been in Africa quite some time. I've been able to go over there and visit you, but we are counting down the days for your furlough in June, and you guys are going to be 20 minutes away from us for a whole year. So it's been 2 years since your last furlough. So the kids definitely grow up a lot in that time period. And so I'm just, yeah, excited and so looking forward to having more face to face time and not just Zoom calls.
Likewise. Oh my goodness, I cannot wait.
Well, change is something that we all experience. And when it's planned for, it can be wonderful but it can still bring some challenges and things that we didn't foresee. But change that is unexpected can also be hard. So just the topic of change is what we want to explore today, life changes and how we can view those, walk through that well, honor the Lord in all of that. So I'm just curious, what are common areas that we experience change in?
Yeah, well, I was really eager and excited to talk about this topic because this is something that I have experienced a lot of. In the last 10 years, I have gotten married. We have lived on 3 continents, have 2 children, have learned 2 new languages. So, common areas where we experience change, there's just a plethora. So, I think the first thing we think of is a move, a physical change. And then there can be a change in marital status. We can get engaged and get married, or we can become a widow. There can be a relationship status change, going from single to dating or from dating to single again. And life stages, there are changes. We have childhood, adolescence, adulthood, where you're leaving home, starting college or a career. In midlife, there are changes like for women, there can be hormonal changes that really impact life. And then as people age, there can be mobility decline, cognitive decline. So those are all life stages that can involve change. The death of someone close to you can be really impacting for you and create change as you adjust to not having that person in your life. Job and career changes. There's physical illness that can cause change and transition into your life. Being healthy and becoming sick, that can be very disruptive. Or even dealing with a friend's move or change can impact your life to missing not having that person around anymore. We can experience change if we move to a new church or Bible study. For couples and families, having a child, adding a child to the family can be a big change. And then a couple more, going back to school can be also an area where we experience change. And finally, the world changing around us, struggling to fit in or feel like you belong, that can impact someone as well.
Yeah, those are all similar ones that I had on my list. And I'm thinking too, when you talk about the world changing, when you guys go to the mission field and then you come back, so much has even changed in the US, like culture and language and all the memes and just how people communicate. And so sometimes you guys, you're constantly adjusting back home to what should be familiar and feels less and less familiar. Yeah. I remember you told me once, "Tell me what's all the current memes," and I'm like, "I don't know, I'm so out of the loop too."
Oh yeah, it's a big change coming back to the US, and clothing styles have changed. People are using pronouns now. I hadn't even ever heard of that when we had left before. Yeah, lots of changes to come back to America.
And then where you guys are at, you are in, you said rural Africa. It's actually the poorest country in the world where you're serving. So you come from that level of poverty to the US where it's just everything is abundant and there's stuff. And yeah, that I know is always a challenge to adapt back to going from seeing people starving to seeing people overeat.
Yeah. Oh, I remember the first time we went through Walmart a few years back when we were back on a home assignment, and my son, who had never remembered America or experienced that, I got him in a shopping cart and we walked in, and the lights and the stuff and the music and the people were so overwhelming to him. He just started screaming and bawling. And my daughter was pointing at everything saying, "Look, Paw Patrol, look at this, look at that." We looked like we had just come from another planet. People were looking at us kind of funny. But yeah, the change from this environment back to a very affluent country is definitely it's very impactful and a bit jarring.
Well, I'm curious what biblical examples that we see where people have had to adapt to change in their life.
Yeah, well, as I was looking just flipping through my Bible, it was hard to just choose a few to talk about because I think every person from Adam and Eve and just flipping through Noah, I was like, wow, all these people have experienced major changes in their lives. And so first I would like to talk about Abraham and the change that he experienced briefly, and his wife Sarah. I just read a book about her. So Abraham at age 75, he was told to leave his country and go someplace he had never seen before, and then promised that he would have a son. Had been childless his whole life. He was a childless man and was going to become the father of many nations, but it took many years for that to come to fruition. And his wife, Sarah, she started her journey at 65 years of age. And she was also given that promise. She had been barren all the way up, and she did not have her son until she was 90 years old. So she had this long, lifelong journey of first this change of leaving her hometown and following her husband through the wilderness. So on this journey where they would go to the land that was promised to them, and then 90 before her life changed by having a child. And in MacArthur's book, 12 Extraordinary Women, which I highly recommend, he said, and he's quoting Hebrews 11, together, Abraham and Sarah, they dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents while they waited for the city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And MacArthur says it's a good summary of any earthly life Sarah inherited when she stepped out in faith to follow her husband, earthly inconvenience mitigated by a promise of eternal blessing. So she is someone that I look at as she she had a huge change both in location and in legacy, where she left her hometown, but then she also waited throughout her life for that fulfillment of the promise of having a son. And I also think another woman in the Bible is Ruth. She experienced the change of culture and identity. She, became a widow. So she was married and then became a widow. And she decided to leave her religion, her culture, her support system that she had to follow her mother-in-law to a foreign land. And what an inspiration she is in our life of how she graciously navigated that huge change and transition, and with faith in the Lord that he would be with her. And what a an epic story of how God used her and her child who she had, Obed, who was the grandfather of King David, and redeemed a hopeless situation.
Yeah, I love those examples. I had Ruth written down on my list too. And another person that I think of is Joseph. And, being going from being like the father's favored son to imprisoned, and just for doing right. He never did anything wrong, but just trusting the Lord, and how he excelled and rose to the top of each new change. In the prison, he rose to the top there. In the house of Potiphar, he rose to the top there. In Pharaoh's house, he rose to the top. It was just, he trusted the Lord and then excelled and did his best in each new change, each new environment God placed him in. And then ultimately helping to keep his family alive during famine and all of that. So just encouraging examples of trust in God through what looks like horrible changes, imprisonment, abandonment, God is still sovereign and still working. But what unique challenges would single women experience in seasons of change?
Yes. Well, I just sat down with a pen and started brainstorming. And the first big transition we often think of is a move. And so for a single woman, the physical labor of that sort of change can fall on them. Mostly you just experienced a move. And so you know what that's like with packing and disassembling furniture and reassembling furniture. So all of that, the physical labor, it's not like you're sharing that with someone, but I mean, you can have friends that help, but it falls on you mostly as a single person. The mental fatigue that can come in from a move or whatever change that you're experiencing because those decisions often you're trying to handle alone, from choosing paint color for a new room or house or decorations or which items to keep or which items to sell or how to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. If should you have someone meet the other person or should you meet them alone? Is that safe when meeting with strangers and trying to sell things? So that can create stress in a single person's life because you kind of feel like you're navigating some of those things alone. And mental fatigue can also come when you're experiencing an illness. So not only are you not feeling well, but you're trying to make decisions about doctors and treatment options and make those medical decisions in the midst of experiencing a health change. And that can also be mentally fatiguing. Finances is another one that can impact a single uniquely just because they're often the one that's the single breadwinner for their family. So trying to navigate all of that with missed work days and trying to make it work can be challenging. There's three others that I thought of. Safety concerns. So when moving to a new city or neighborhood, like vetting, like, is this a safe area? Would I feel safe here living alone? Crisis management. So in the midst of change, if a car breaks down or a pipe bursts in your house, as a single, you're kind of a first responder in the sense where you kind of have to navigate that alone. And you can reach out, of course, and ask for people to help, but it can feel sometimes overwhelming as those layers pile up. And one thing, Christy, that you have experienced is if a family member experiences a change, often the single person becomes the default choice for being a caregiver for an aging parent just because they are seen to have fewer responsibilities. And that's not always true, but so that sometimes they can feel the weight of those expectations from family members to kind of help bear that burden more so maybe than other people that would have families.
I think you hit the nail on the head with so many of those. And just regarding a move, if you do it with a spouse, you have someone to process that with. And they're walking through that with you. Whereas when you do it alone, yes, you can talk to friends and things, but no one's going through the exact same situation. And so there's just not that common ground, common processing ground that you can have with someone. And then, yeah, all the decisions that have to be made and feeling the responsibility and weight of those financially, or like you said, with if you have health issues, doctors. And so, yeah, I guess it just makes us lean on the Lord and makes us more and more dependent on Him. And I know in my own life, I've seen the Lord be very kind and give wisdom and give direction when I've lacked that. So, yeah, we seek that for sure in the Lord. But now down to the very practical part of change. What are healthy ways that when we walk through a change that we can process that emotionally, mentally, just adapt well? I would just love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but some things that have helped me and navigate all the changes that we have experienced. I think one thing that I've realized, if we are not hands-on and proactive, sometimes we don't realize until years after in change that we haven't really taken the time to do the processing or the soul care, and it can spill over. So there are three things that have helped me. And I actually sat down with a single doctor on our team, Alyssa, and I just kind of asked her about change and how she is processing change. She has lived overseas for 13 years now as a single doctor. So before she deployed, they had her sit down and draw a picture of where she saw herself and how she kind of understood this change, what she was feeling about it. And she drew a picture of an ocean, and she drew a boat and a picture of herself in the boat. And all of her teammates that were also deploying, she put them in boats around her. So she put the families each in their boats, and then herself in her boat alone. And I think this really is a good analogy of sometimes how a single person can experience change because they are in that boat. And they, like Alyssa, she was deploying with all these other teammates, and they were around her for that period of time. They were next to her and they were all sailing in the same direction, but they were all still in their separate boats. And I'll come back to that analogy later, but I think the challenge is that singles can often feel alone in their boat. They can feel isolated. Um, Married couples, families that are in a boat can talk to each other about the change that they are experiencing and have someone with similar experiences to process with. But she said that it took courage for her to admit that she would actually really like to have someone to talk to. And it also took physical effort for her to row her boat alongside someone else's boat because often she didn't want to admit that she really needed someone to talk to. She wanted to handle it herself. So that was one thing that she saw in her life that was a reality, and it was a bit of a challenge. So she, over the years, has learned that it's important for her to, if we're continuing on with the same figurative sense, to row her boat up to other people's. And so I would encourage singles that are experiencing change. If you're feeling alone in your boat, don't be afraid to row your boat up to others and talk to them. In fact, get like a regular mentor or counselor in your life, someone like a regular call, like every month or twice a month, or someone that you can count on that you know that person will be there and help you process that change. And and especially if someone's kind of an internal processor, it can help you get outside your head. And it doesn't have to be just one person, it can be multiple people, especially if you're needing someone for work or family issues. Like it doesn't have to be just one person. So the other thing that has helped me process change has been something we covered in pre-field training. They talked about something called the transition bridge. So just imagine the transition bridge. Imagine you're walking on a road called the old normal, and up ahead is a deep valley, and a wooden bridge is stretching across the valley. And underneath the bridge, we see the word chaos. And on the other side is the word new normal. And the wooden slats of the bridge itself, we see for the first word is initiation of an event or decision. Then we see preparations. Then we see endings. Then we see chaos. And then we find a little gap in the bridge where there's a space, which is called the liminal space, kind of an empty space. And then we see the words on the other boards leading up to the new normal: acceptance, and then beginnings, and exploration, and adaptation. And then once the new normal side is reached, we find the word settled. Now, we know this is not exactly how, change or things progress. But for me, it's been a good mental picture of the feelings that we might experience as we're experiencing a change, or we're going through a move, or changing jobs, or starting school, or saying goodbye to a good friend who's moving away. There might be a process of how to get to that new normal. So we might feel surprised that we are feeling unsettled and a bit chaotic, but it's not surprising. That's actually kind of a normal progression of what we might experience when going through a change. That is one thing that has helped me. In fact, I've talked about that with my children as we talk about our move back to America and some feelings we might feel during that move. And I think just having our minds prepared that we might feel a bit of chaos as we are moving forward to the new normal, just being mentally prepared for that can be helpful. So that was one picture that they gave us for pre-field training, just to help us on the front end to know when you experience a big move or a transition or a change, it's normal to feel these things and kind of expect this progression a bit. One thing I wanted to touch on briefly was the concept of pre-grieving and post-grieving. So, yeah, there's a dynamic that's, not everyone fits into this category, but it can be tendencies. People can have tendencies to be pre-grievers and post-grievers. And I think this, when trying to process change in a healthy way, has helped me immensely understand myself. I'm definitely a pre-griever. Carlin is definitely a post-griever. So if I'm going to be experiencing a move, and I will be in a few weeks now before we head back to the States, I have a tendency to focus on the move, to start feel sorry already about the things I will miss, to kind of do all that emotional processing of a change or a transition on the front end. So yeah, so a pre-griever might have a tendency to pull away from a relationship just because they don't want the goodbyes to hurt quite as much. They might notice on the front end of a move or a transition that their performance is starting to fall behind and things that they were once good at. So for myself and for people that tend to fall into that category, just kind of like on the front end, identifying what is making you sad, identify that grief, kind of express that in journaling, praying, like tell the Lord what you're feeling. And if you want, talk to a trusted counselor or a friend or a spouse if you're married. For me, I love listening to music and going on a jog. Those kind of things help me process those feelings, help me express some of those feelings that I'm feeling on the front end. And I would say for a pre-griever, just resist the urge. This is really important. Resist the urge of pulling away from relationships. Lean in to relationships, even though it might hurt to say goodbye. Leave well. Raising up a generation of healthy third culture kids. That is a book that Lauren Wells wrote, and in it she has the raft analogy word, RAFT, R, reconciliation. So reconcile with people before you experience a move or a transition. A would be affirmation, write thank you cards. Instead of pulling away, lean in to those. The F in raft is farewell. So really be purposeful in how you say goodbye. Take time to say goodbyes. So for our kids, before we leave a house, we will often walk around to each room and say goodbye, kitchen, goodbye, living room. We would walk around to their favorite places outside. It's really helpful for them to really say a good goodbye to some place or some person. And then think destination. So have something to look forward to in your new location. Like you can maybe create a post-arrival plan. So for my kids, we're talking about getting a parakeet, and they're so excited about that. It gives them something to look forward to in the new location. And just briefly, the post griever, who my husband tends to be a post griever, he's fine all the way up until the move actually happens. And then a post griever will experience a lot of those feelings after a move. And sometimes their goodbyes might even be more unemotional because they almost would say, see you later. They haven't processed that they are saying goodbye sometimes. So a post griever, the new normal might be difficult for them to engage in because they are starting to feel sad and disconnected, and their performance might lag. on the back end of a move once the move has actually happened. So for a post griever, I would encourage you to find space to process. The same with a pre griever, but just allow yourself time to process. Journal, talk with a mentor, a trusted friend, and pray, seek the Lord to help you find ways to adjust to that new normal. And I think one thing that I have seen is that that process, it might not be immediate. It might be more of a lengthy process to adjust to a new normal for someone that's a post griever. And then I would also encourage anyone and everyone to really lean into relationships and community. Find a strong Christian community to connect with, and that is life giving for a believer to have that community around you as you are experiencing change.
And you might have to be the initiator too, like in your new area, you may expect to have other people be the ones to reach out to you because you're the new person, but sometimes that doesn't people don't rise to that challenge, and so you need to initiate. And then one thing that I've found helpful is to keep my kind of some of the routines in place during a transition. So, obviously the spiritual disciplines, I'm still regularly praying, reading my Bible, physical exercise, eating healthy, getting good sleep. So those core areas of life that contribute to strength and physical health and spiritual vitality, keeping those in place regardless of if you're moving locations or relationship status or whatever it is, that's going to help you because there is going to be a measure of stress with change because you are having to think a lot harder. Things aren't routine yet. You have to, especially with a move, like you're learning how to drive around a new city and finding your grocery stores. And so you're not an autopilot yet. You have to think about everything. Or like I imagine if you get married, you're learning another person and how to do life with them. And there's just a lot to think about. So yeah, I think if you can keep your spirit, your heart, your physical body strong, that's going to help you not feel so overwhelmed in seasons of change. And then I was just thinking of some specific passages in the Bible that talk about God being our rock. And I think those attributes of God can just be so comforting in seasons of change. Psalm 62:6 says, "He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken." Isaiah 26:4, "Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock." Psalm 71:3, "Be to me a rock of refuge to which I may continually come." I know for me, that's been helpful when in uncertainty, when things feel shaky or you don't feel like you have something firm to stand on yet, go to God and be thankful that He is always with you, that He is the rock you can stand on, that He is unchanging when other things are changing, when circumstances are changing. So just those truths might be even more meaningful when you are just in that upheaval time of change and figuring out all of that. But beyond our own hearts and our own lives, what about if we see someone around us going through change? Friends, relatives, how can we encourage them in those seasons?
Yeah, I'm reminded of Second Corinthians chapter 1, verses 3 through 4, who says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." And so it's a blessed thing to be able to have experienced that comfort from the Lord when we are in the times of trial and transition in those wilderness periods, and then to be able to comfort those around us who are going through the same thing. The main concept I would love to communicate is to listen, to be a listening ear. I want to quote Rodney Anderson. He said, "Listening is an act of love." Don't just be quick to fix someone's problem. to don't be quick to just put a Band-Aid on it, tell them it'll all be better. Sit with them and listen to them. Listen to their struggles. The Bible tells us in Romans 12 to weep with those who weep and to rejoice with those who rejoice, and acknowledge that this struggle that someone is sharing with you or experiencing, it might be really difficult for them emotionally. And sit with them and really pray with them and be there to listen to that person. My child will express sometimes about really missing a family member or a friend when we've experienced a move. And instead of just saying, "Oh, you'll make new friends, that's okay," I actually tell them, those feelings that you're feeling right now of sorrow and sadness because you are missing someone is actually a really healthy sign because it means that you loved deeply. And it's a beautiful thing to love deeply. We don't want to have superficial relationships just because we don't want to be hurt to say goodbye. Like it's a good, healthy thing to love people so deeply that it hurts to say goodbye. So for kids, since we're talking about kids, if you have kids in your life that are going through a change, they might not be able to verbally express yet what they are experiencing or feeling. One thing that we have tried to do with our kids is to do a high point and low point every day at the dinner table. So we have our kids tell us their high point was and what their low point was. And I've often, it's been often eye opening for me to see what they say, what their high point is or low point. But giving a child or a person a way, a healthy way to express their feelings is very good. So for kids, sometimes because they might not have the verbal ability to express feelings, giving them an outlet to work out what is going on in their heart. So for young kids, it can be like do some jumping jacks or let's go on a walk. Let's draw a picture of what you're feeling. For older kids, it could be playing a musical instrument, journaling. So just for children, that's just kind of some tips to help children process change. And I want to really quick flip the script. So, for those who are not single but are listening to this podcast and have singles in their life, I would encourage you to find some practical ways to serve them. Here are some ideas. You could make a home repair coupons where your husband could help with tasks around their house. They wouldn't have to feel awkward to ask for help. You could take them a meal. I wonder how often that happens these days. And the single gal that I was talking to said she'd never had someone bring her a meal ever. Help pack, of course, drive a moving truck for them. The single missionary doctor on our team said that when she was moving overseas, gals from her church threw a container shower for her. She'd never been married, never had a bridal shower, but she didn't have dishes or all the household items. So they threw a container party and brought all these gifts wrapped, and she opened them and was able to put them on the container and go overseas with all these items to be able to use for her future life and ministry. So, yeah, so just row your boat up next to a singles boat and ask how they're doing. Don't just wait for them to come to you. Do life alongside them. And of course, pray for them. Pray for your friends who are experiencing change.
Such practical and encouraging points. And I liked how you started out with being a good listener. Because again, as we're expressing, a lot of this is just processing change. And if someone can verbally talk through something, a lot of women are verbal processors. You might not have to say anything, but just letting them talk it out can be really helpful for them. And I love when you were talking about your kids doing their high point and low point. I remember the first time I heard your son, Isaiah, who was, I think, like 3 at the time, ask me, "What's your high point? What's your low point?" And I just like, what? It was such a mature question for a 3-year-old to ask me. I'm like, I have to think deeply about this. And it made me laugh. But there are some people who love change, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but for the person who is afraid of change, what are things that they should be reminded of to take some of the fear factor out of that for them?
Well, what I like to remind myself, because I tend to fall into that category, I would be someone that would be more afraid of future change, is that the Lord does not change. He is always the same, and He's always with us. So, Hebrews 13, that's a good verse to camp on. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So he, like you said before, he is our rock and our foundation, our strong tower. You just said that when the world around us feels like it's falling apart. So when things are changing, yeah, it's a huge temptation to feel vulnerable and insecure. But when we place ourselves on that sure foundation, that can give us so much more peace in the midst of all of the change that we experience. So I would just encourage someone who is afraid of change to remind themselves of that truth that God is always with us. He is always constant and consistent in our lives, no matter where we find ourselves. And no matter what the future may hold, God will be there with us. And God himself said to Joshua in Joshua 1:9, "Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Another thing I have found comfort in is to take it just one day at a time. So, our Aunt Jeannie was an example of a woman. She was a woman of faith all the way to the end. And her last day on earth, she died of lung cancer, even though she had never smoked a day in her life. But she was counseling people from her hospital bed. And I asked her, "Aunt Jeannie, how are you so joyful and steadfast in the midst of this huge change and trial?" And she said, "I take it one day at a time." And she kept her focus on the Lord. I know for me, I tend to pre grieve events in the future that have not happened yet. I think sometimes of the worst possible outcome could be. And Matthew 6:34, it says, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Sometimes when I tend to be anxious about future change, it's because I could think about the worst possible outcome. And finally, if you find that you're the type of person that has difficulty in making decisions and stepping forward into the unknown, I would encourage you to find someone in your life who can be an encourager and a cheerleader for you, who will push you to try new things, maybe be more adventurous in that aspect. And I would say my husband has been that for me. When we first started dating, he would always chuckle at the fact that I would always order the same thing from a menu from a restaurant because I would find what I liked. And I was, kind of afraid of departing from that because it felt safe and I knew I wanted a certain thing. And he would tell me, "No, try something else. You might like it." So, and often when I would try something new, I would like it. Not always, but he applauded that effort.
I like that point. I've never thought about that before, but finding other people that you can do change with. I find that that helps with our courage too. Like just as a simple example, but I'm living in a new house now and I like to walk, so I'm trying new paths, but sometimes I'm a little like insecure about going out on forging my own path or looking on my own, but I had a friend join me on a walk last night and so we went and explored some new routes, and I felt way more courageous to do it with someone and than trying to do it on my own. So finding someone who can join you in that. But I like what John Piper said about fear. He said, "Fear is not a good guide for what we should do." And so if you're afraid of change, don't let that hold you back. Fear's not the right motivation in your life. So reconsider that. It could be that you like to have control of your life, and that change brings a lot of unknowns and you lose control for a time. But it's good for us to trust God and to walk by faith. Jerry Bridges said, To trust God in the light is nothing, but to trust him in the dark, that is faith. You can have someone on the other end of the spectrum who is hooked on change. They always have to be doing something different and new, or traveling or moving, which is not necessarily inherently wrong, but it could point to some potential heart issues. So I'd just be curious, what would you encourage someone who's living in that reality?
Yeah, like you said, some people thrive. They thrive on change. The thrill of moving or starting a new job or making new friends, having lots of friends, and actually the thought of settling down in one location and having one house and one job and a group of friends, putting roots down deep can feel really unsettling for that type of person. And I think that can become problematic when it starts to interfere with stable jobs or a stable church involvement where where you can develop really deep friends, where people can really get to know you, keep you accountable. That's where it can become problematic. Now, there are things that are fun to change, more minor things like hairstyles and clothing, painting a room a different color, furniture layout. And if you ask my kids, I rearrange the furniture in our living room probably once every 2 weeks. At first, they came in and were like, "What are you doing?" But now they help me because they just know I love moving things around. So, those kind of changes are fine, but I think we need to think more deeply about some other types of changes before we make them, like changing friends or jobs or churches or even schools if you're in the middle of getting a degree, and knowing the difference between what are things that are fun and more minor to change and what are things that maybe you should think more deeply about or more weighty, that shouldn't just be changed frequently. So, yeah, I think if you're the kind of person that is prone to change and thrives on that, maybe looking back over your life and trying to think, maybe why? Why do a soul search? Why might I be struggling with this in my life? So, maybe it's because the person is doubting. They don't have solid convictions. Maybe they have started a degree and want to change and are constantly changing their majors and their minors because they have not decided, on a direction. Maybe they are hooked on change because they are trying to find joy in searching for it in places other than the Lord. Maybe they're trying to find joy by receiving affirmation. So they're changing jobs or careers or locations because they're trying to find affirmation. And I'm reminded of Matthew 6:33, which says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." So trying to find that satisfaction in life and that joy in the wrong place can maybe motivate people to change often. And then maybe boredom, maybe, you know, trying to explore a new endeavor. Learning new skills is fun for us, and I enjoy that too. It's been kind of my life goal to learn something new every year. So that's not a bad desire, but if that comes at the cost of deep relationships, not finishing projects and things we had started, maybe it can point to a sort of laziness, because it's hard to dig deep. It's hard to stay committed to finish what we start. So that takes really a lot of effort. So, yeah, for someone that's prone to change and thrives on that, I would just simply say have deep friendships, people that can really know you and be there for the long run and can speak truth in your life, and stay in touch with them even if your location changes. Don't just change friends groups all the time, but have those lifelong friends that can really keep you accountable. And instead of looking for that joy and change, look for that in serving others, and be invested where God has you right now.
The quote that I loved is, "Service is the pathway to joy." And I don't know who said that, but it's one that I've thought about often. And yeah, it's good to cultivate faithfulness and perseverance. So if you're quick to jump from one thing to the next, is it because maybe relationships are hard? And so you don't want to stick it out. It's just easier to uproot and transplant somewhere else and try to find a different friend group or different church that you click with more. And it's not, again, not inherently wrong to make changes like that, but just if it's a pattern in your life, maybe that could be where you really think about, okay, am I just looking for comfort? Am I just looking for people that meet all these needs for me? Or am I giving of myself and serving and considering others is more important than myself? So, yeah, it can just be like you said, a good time of soul searching of, okay, why is this my tendency? How can I enjoy change, like, in the ways that I can? Like you
Mhm.
said, the hairstyle, get bangs or something, dye your hair. But, yeah, you can still have change in your life, but it doesn't have to be those big, like, church hopping type changes. But then I've experienced this quite a bit when I'm longing for change, I'm getting antsy and change never comes. And everyone else around you seems like they're moving through life, their life is changing. Either they're moving locations or having their, have a job change, marital status change. And you're like, my life looks the same as it did 20 years ago. I'm in the same location, doing the same thing at the same church, and life feels static. So, for someone who's in that place, what are good truths to be reminded of? How can you encourage their heart in that static place?
Yeah. Oh, I can relate. I didn't get married until my mid-30s. And I know we had talked about this in the past, but often I felt like I was standing on the train station of life, and the train of life, the train of marriage had come for my friends. They had gotten on the train and had gone off, and I was still standing there waiting for my train. But, this is not a perfect analogy because it can cause us to think, we're in a holding pattern. I'm just standing on this train station waiting for something to happen. While all the while, we might very well be on the train of God's perfect will for our life. And that might be we might be on a train, on that current train, and being obedient and faithful where God has us. And it might be maybe another passenger on that train is someone that we'll meet to be a future spouse. So I think that's an analogy that I had used in the past, but I can see where it can cause us to think, oh, my life hasn't started until something happens, until I get married, until I have kids. Whereas right now, where you are right now, this is where God has you and where God is working in your life. And so live to the fullest where God has you now, even if it seems like aren't changing, that like things are static. I'm reminded of Sarah. Again, we can talk about her, how she was in an unchanging place for many years. She had been promised a child, and year after year after year went by without the fulfillment of that promise. The majority of her life was lived in what probably felt to her like a waiting place. No movement was happening. But actually, it was during these moments in her life and in the life of Joseph, like we talked about earlier, during these times of the wilderness or waiting, where God is actually doing really important heart work in their lives and our lives, perfecting our faith. So I would encourage the listener to take heart. Don't become discouraged, even if you're in a season that seems very static, very wilderness like. This might be the very place where God is doing a very important work in your heart, even more so than in the fun, exciting times of life. And just a practical tip, not that we want to distract ourselves from the lesson that God might be teaching us during those times, but it's not a bad thing to try new things if you have margin in your life. I took a cooking class in my during my single years that has benefited me greatly now that we live in rural Africa. I picked up painting, I took up rock climbing, learning a new instrument, a new language. These are all things that you could do to during sometimes maybe those periods of life where you might have more margin.
No, that's a really good point, and I was thinking even when your circumstances aren't changing, you can still be developing as a person, and growing in your knowledge and skill set, and just as Travis Allen said recently, becoming excellent at the basics of the Christian life. So you can be growing spiritually and in so many other areas, even if circumstances aren't what you want them to be. And I like what John Piper said. He said, God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of three of them. So, like I said, there's a lot that God is never static. He's always working, always at work in your life. He hasn't forgotten you. I think that can be a lie that we believe in seasons where we feel static of like, God, are you there? What's happening? But he is at work in our lives. He hasn't forgotten about us. And it's teaching us so many important character qualities of how to wait on the Lord. Actually, we've done an episode on that topic on waiting on God. What does that mean? What does it look like? And that's a common refrain in the scriptures about wait on the Lord. It helps you develop faithfulness, perseverance, all those character qualities. But I would love to hear what other qualities are strengthened, not even in the waiting, but also when we do experience change, and what are things we can be growing in? Because I think that if we can have a right perspective and be excited about what God is doing in our hearts, then that helps change and maybe some of the challenges we may experience in it when we have the right perspective. So I would be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, yeah. So I one thing I was reminding myself of is that change, I think often we think of change as a bad thing, and it can be a good thing. Can be a type of grace, actually. In 1 Corinthians 15:51, I'll just read that whole passage, that whole verse, because it's so beautiful. It says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" So, looking forward to the future, realizing that we are not going to stay the same as we are now. Praise God. And looking forward to that change. And Romans 5:3-4 says, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope." So change is not an obstacle to our spiritual growth. It's actually the very instrument that God uses to shape our character. So realizing that no, this is something that God is using in our lives to perfect us can cause to give us hope in the midst of those seasons where things can look difficult and hopeless. So I want to return to that boat analogy, and we can again imagine that we are all in our boats sailing through life, singles in their boats and families in their boats. But one important detail is that as believers, we know that we are not alone in our boat. We have the Lord with us. And what a comfort that is. We can talk to him about all that we are experiencing. He can calm the storms of life. We have nothing to fear. There's a little poem I found in Beside Still Waters, Spurgeon wrote. It says, "Within thy circling power I stand. On every side I find thy hand. Awake, asleep, at home, abroad, I am surrounded still with God." So it's in those difficult seasons that cause us to fix our gaze on the Lord and to go to him with the challenges that we are facing. So I was actually at a very low point in my life in my mid 30s. A relationship had just ended. I was getting ready to move again, and I remember I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom with my journal. I was journaling, and I just started writing down some a poem that just started coming to me, and it actually that poem ended up being a song that I wrote at that time in my life. And that has actually been something God has used throughout all the years to encourage me. I'm just going to read part of it. Abide my spirit in this truth. He faithful will remain. Your hope is found in him alone. His mercy does not change. For he alone is joy. He alone is peace. He alone is love that will not let you go. So, the lesson that I have learned in those moments of change is that God is with me and that God does not change. And, even now, years later, I've been married for almost 11 years. I have two beautiful children. That is still a truth that I have to learn and relearn and camp on. That God is with me. He is there with me, and that truth is what gives me comfort in life. He's there with me in the boat, and even when all the world is changing around me. And I want to be keeping my focus on him, not like Peter, which when he got his gaze focused on the wind and the waves, that is when he started to sink. But I want to keep my eyes on the Lord, focused on the Lord, and know that it's his love that will stabilize me and us. Even our boat in the middle of the ocean can feel like home when we are with him.
That's so beautiful, Michelle. And I want to direct the listeners because you are a songwriter and you have a degree in piano performance, and a lot of your music is online and it's just instrumental mainly, but maybe I could link that for the listeners who want to just have some beautiful music to listen to. Yeah, it's just a wonderful truth to come back to, that we always have the Lord with us and near us and comforting us and guiding us. And so we're never alone in those changes. Some of the other character qualities that I came up with about in regards to what we learn during seasons of change is flexibility. And I think that's a really important one, especially for singles who we can have the stereotype of getting stuck in a rut. So it's important to remain flexible, adaptable, and change definitely works that in us. Like we've already talked about trusting the Lord and depending on him when we don't think we have control or feel like we have control. And even with the trials that can come along with change, I love the quote that John MacArthur said, trials are the means by which God produces spiritual strength. And you talked about that. This is an instrument that God is going to use to do character, heart work in us. And when we keep our gaze on him and on the work he's doing, we're going to cooperate. We're going to learn those lessons better. We're not going to fight him in that. And so those are just helpful reminders in any kind of life change. So change is good for us. It teaches us so much. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And ultimately, someday we will be in that city forever. We'll never have another move after we are in our eternal state. Yeah, with the Lord. And I just,
No other goodbyes, never another goodbye.
yeah.
Always be with him and with each other.
So thanks, Michelle. This was such a fun conversation, and you do have so much wisdom, and I'm always learning from you. And I'm excited that I get to share you with the listeners today, and they can enjoy this sister conversation. But it's going to be, yeah, again, just so excited that you're coming home in 2 months now. And it's going to be so wonderful to spend that in-person
Oh,
time with you.
I'm so looking forward to that, Christine. Thank you so much for having me join you on your podcast. And I have learned so much from you, even doing this podcast. The different comments that you'll say, it's just, wow, God has just blessed you with wisdom and Thank you for sharing your time and your gifts to bless me and those and all your other listeners.